Good afternoon and welcome to another Human Results in Conversation With. This afternoon we have Managing Director from Human Results, Mr. Alistair Hobbs. Good afternoon, Alistair.
Hi, Ben.
How was National Beer Day?
National Beer Day was spent quietly contemplating beer with a beer, but quite late at night. National Beer Day passed like any other Monday generally, except not spent in the pub.
This afternoon's special guest, we have a friend of both Alistair's and mine, is Mr. Sean Philpott from Copia Wealth and Tax Accountancy Practice. Good afternoon, Sean.
Yes, good afternoon, Ben and Alistair. I had a dry day on National Beer Day, unfortunately.
Did you?
I don't drink in the week normally, but I'm saving it up for the weekend, so I'll make up for it on Friday night, Saturday night.
Are you going to get treated on Father's Day then, Sean?
We'll see.
The reason we're here today is because there is another government scheme. Now, it's called, I believe, Flexible Furlough Scheme. We won't think about who's decided the acronym for that, but Sean, another complicated scheme. Tell us about the Flexible Furlough Scheme.
Yeah, the Flexible Furlough Scheme is sort of following on from the original Coronavirus Job Retention Scheme, CJRS as it was effectively known. This is now being called CJRS V2 in some cases, version 2. This is a follow-on scheme. So the original scheme, which allowed people to furlough staff and get the government to pay 80% of their cost, is basically being extended from the 30th of June into now potentially up to the 31st of October. It's quite a long extension. Version 2 or FFS starts from the 1st of July. So the sort of old scheme comes to an end at the end of this month. The new scheme starts from the following month. The key message to get from it is that the reason it's called the Flexible Furlough Scheme is because it is more flexible. Under version 1 of the scheme, you had to have everyone furloughed for a minimum of 3 weeks each. That has now gone. And obviously, when they were furloughed, they couldn't work at all. Anything they could do really was training. Under the new scheme, which is a way of trying to encourage employers now to get people back to work, what I'm saying is that you can have flexibility. So you can be furloughed for some of the week and you can work for some of the week. If you have your employees working for some of the week, you have to pay them their full hourly rate. But if they're not working for all the week and they're furloughed for the rest of the time, then the government will pick up the tab, to start with all of the tab. But what's going to happen under this FFS scheme is gradually the government support is going to start to reduce, so that effectively will be an employer cost going forward. So instead of the government covering effectively all that you have to pay your employee, they gradually start to tail off. And this is effectively a way to sort of encourage employers now to start encouraging people back to work. You needed to have more flexibility built into it to do that, but equally the government is saying that on top of that, you're going to have to start accepting the fact as employers, you're going to have to be bearing some costs to that as well. That's the broad flavour of it. There's obviously a lot of rules within it. You must have furloughed your staff in the previous scheme if you're going to furlough them under the new scheme. So if you haven't furloughed someone before, in June or prior, then you can't furlough them under the new scheme. So there are a few things you've got to watch out for. I think the key message for employers is they obviously, as now there is going to be a cost coming into this, kind of time to make your mind up whether the employees that to some extent you might have kept on purely because the government's picking up the tab, whether that's going to carry on going forward. So I think there is a danger here that we're going to see an increase in redundancies going forward because suddenly the employer's got a cost, and if they're not happy that they're going to be able to get fully back to work, and I'm thinking particularly here of things like the hospitality industry, where if the social distancing continues and they can only sort of run at a fairly low capacity, they're obviously not going to need all their staff. So they may well decide at this point that they're going to need to get rid of people. It is going to encourage people back to work, but equally I think it's going to result in a lot of employers biting the bullet and looking at redundancy.
We're now at the end of the beginning, aren't we? And now this is where it's all really going to start to kick in, the effects of the coronavirus and what we've been through, isn't it?
Yeah, I just read this morning actually that last month in May, the number of employees on payroll had dropped by about 620,000 people. Now, bearing in mind that that's for the month of May, furlough scheme still very much in existence, that's only going to accelerate. Companies are now, now that the new flexible furlough scheme has been announced, they can see the writing on the wall, they can see the point where it's starting with pension contributions and PAYE and things, you can see the extra cost on business. And they're looking at their resourcing. The government is trying hard to provide some flexibility and to get the economy going again to their credit. And I have had chats with clients where we were looking to see if maybe there, in some cases there's been people who've been working, who's had a period of time on furlough, they can be furloughed or take holiday whilst others come out of furlough and are working, and they can start to just actually refresh the workplace and get people back in. But I think a lot of people now, I'm looking at 10% as a reasonable assessment of the kind of numbers that a lot of businesses are looking to shed. It's not just about COVID-19. They've actually, in some cases, just been able to see what their resourcing requirements have been. You know, if you've spent the last 4 months in manufacturing, still manufacturing, but with maybe 50% of your workforce on furlough, but actually there's still, what you've got there is producing 75% of your normal turnover. You know that people can work a bit harder and a bit more efficiently. So you can start to make those sort of decisions, and we're starting to do it now. With my solicitor's hat on, I'm also seeing employees coming out of the woodwork increasingly in the last fortnight with settlement agreements and conversations around redundancy. And we're seeing, I don't know your take on this, Sean, but I'm seeing employers, not necessarily my clients, but I'm seeing employers now trying to use the furlough scheme to maximise the cover for payment of notice periods, wrapping in accrued holiday across that period, and indeed, from what I can see in some cases, the redundancy pay itself, which is not what the scheme's there for. And that's an interesting development that I'd heard anecdotally about, but I'm just starting to see myself. Hasten to add, none of my clients, but I'm seeing employees picking up the phone and looking for advice because they're being presented with the opportunity on the one hand of being kept on furlough to the 31st of October, then leaving on the 31st of October with no additional pay, maybe a couple of days, 2.5 days holiday, which would have presumably have been what's been accrued in the month of October, which seems interesting. But they're definitely in a difficult position because you can look at the maths and actually think, well, if they kick up a stink now, don't sign an agreement, get dismissed, they could be looking at 2022 before they got a stint at an employment tribunal hearing comfortably at the moment with the backlog, and they're faced with a situation where they have the certainty of their full pay to the end of October, the opportunity of getting another job in the meantime and just paying the extra tax, taking the certainty of the deal. It's not quite in the spirit of the scheme, but as Ben has pointed out, FFS.
Are your larger clients having these kind of conversations with you at the moment? Are they coming on to you and saying, look, we've realised what's been going on, what do we do?
To be fair, since the announcement of the FFS scheme, I've had quite a lot of calls because I think people are trying to get their heads around exactly how it's working, and I think it is beginning to make employers sort of crystallise decisions now. They've sort of almost been able to sort of hibernate their businesses up to now, really, without having to make any changes because most of the costs have been covered. But now all of a sudden that isn't going to be the situation, so they're having to really start to think long and hard about what they're doing, and inevitably, in some cases, as Alistair said, they're realising that the workforce they've got is too big for the time being, and they're going to have to make changes because of the nature of having to consult. Obviously, they're having to start to look at what they're going to do, come up with a strategy, and then start consulting with their employees. Inevitably, there are going to be a number of employers where I think they are seriously looking at whether they need the same level of workforce going forward. I mean, it's like in my industry. I've had my staff all working from home, and a lot of them have sort of said, I quite fancy doing this permanently.
I've had a number of conversations, with individual employees looking for advice, and obviously with my background, I've been speaking to lawyers in some cases, and professional services and businesses where IT companies. There are the service sector companies, where people charge for their time as much as anything else. Those office-based staff in manufacturing businesses as well have been able to work from home in many cases. So when an employer turns around and says, actually, you know what, I want you in work, it's not an irrational fear to say that I'm not comfortable about coming to work. I've been working now since March from home. Many people were working from home for 2, 3, 4 weeks before the furlough scheme came in, for example. So I've been working from home. You can see I've been productive. We're covering what needs doing. Yes, I've got kids with I've got childcare issues because my child is not in school. I think it takes a brave or foolhardy employer to risk claims or risks losing good staff simply because of their traditional belief that they've got to see him in the office for them to be productive. I sometimes think that that kind of water cooler conversation, social interaction in work is an important part of work. But at the moment, until September, could you really force your employee to come to work in those circumstances? You know, even if you're an accountant or a solicitor, indeed, where you could say, well, you know, you're one of the special frontline troops that are helping with the country's efforts. You know, can you, in all consciousness, say to an employee, "No, I'm not prepared to let you work from home any longer"?
Sure. Just coming back to yourself though on that point, I'm guessing the spreadsheets are getting complicated, aren't they? Because there's certain staff in work then with certain staff. How are you customers coping with that, Sean?
Well, inevitably, a lot of them are asking us to do it. Not surprisingly, in simple terms, yeah, it is going to get more complicated because under the new scheme, you've now got to start also adding into the claims, you know, the usual hours those employees would work, how many actual hours they've done, and therefore how many hours they're furloughed. So it is going to get even more complicated than it was before. The problem with the HMRC system is unless you've got 100 employees, you can't sort of upload the information on block. So you have to literally input it employee by employee, which is a painful process, I have to say. Why they've set it up like that, I don't know, but they have. And because of that, because there's so much manual input going into their system, you know, inevitably it could lead to mistakes being made. I think that's the biggest issue. And of course, there's stuff going through the Houses of Parliament at the moment about what's going to happen if people have got their claims wrong and how HMRC are going to be recovering the money. It's going to be quite a harsh regime. You know, inevitably, if people have made mistakes, and you've just got to hope that HMRC, when they do start checking these things retrospectively, they're going to be sensible about it because A, the rules are pretty complicated, and B, people will make mistakes inevitably. It's not deliberate, it's just inevitable that people do it.
But think of all those cases where HMRC were prescriptive with genuine mistakes or alternative interpretation of the law on working time. How hard HMRC were grouping everybody together, whether they could see it was a legitimate error or whether the employer was a crook, and they both still be publicly castigated. You get into a complicated argument about care home sleepovers, sleep-in working, for example, or travel to work, or, you know, cost of travel in the sort of temp and recruitment industry, for example, and then HMRC go, well, actually, you've shortchanged those workers by a few quid, so have that, pay them, and pay us double. Go on that public list. Is it going to be like that, I wonder? They've created a pretty complicated scheme with this flexible working. There are some worked out examples available now on the government sites, which are helpful. But you know, when I first looked at the scheme itself on Sunday, I gave up and had another pint and thought I'll wait and see if anybody writes about it. You know, basically, I just pulled together all the government guides and said, help yourself.
Oh yeah, you're right. It's complicated and it's easy to make mistakes, and as you say, they are determined they're going to get some of this money back. There's no two ways about it. There's a lot of people I've come across who have, let's be honest, they're furloughed people that potentially they probably shouldn't have. They need to be very careful. That's all I'll say. They need to be really careful.
They're not clear guidelines, are they? Catch-22, because they've tried to keep it all open, so you can use the flexible furlough system, but the guidelines are not set, and so people do then waver outside the guidelines.
Yeah. Well, as Alistair said earlier, you know, there've been 14 different versions of CJRS version 1, let alone version 2. When they brought the guidance out, it didn't cover everything, so people kind of had to make assumptions on what they were supposed to do. And then obviously eventually, through making inquiries to HMRC and the like, eventually you do get the guidance. But the point is, up to that point, people were having to make assumptions because the guidance wasn't clear. So inevitably, people haven't always got these things right. And that's why I'm saying, to some extent, HMRC, they need to take that into account when they're looking at these things, because inevitably there will be people who are trying to shaft the system. Let's be honest, there always are. And they're the people that need to identify and throw the book out. I've got no problem with that. But there are going to be people who will have made genuine mistakes that aren't deliberate, and they just need to, you know, okay, potentially they've got to pay that money back, fair enough if it's outside the rules, but they shouldn't be penalising them for that. I think that's just really unfair. But I just have a feeling, because of the amount of debt the country's in, I've got a feeling that it will be quite a harsh regime, unfortunately.
Yeah, how many resources they've got to go after people proactively remains to be seen.
Do we think we're at a position now where we don't have to go through any more revisions and different versions and, you know, whatever it's going to be called next?
Well, obviously, if there was a second wave in the autumn, God only knows. I mean, the furlough scheme has cost, obviously, it's cost billions, but I don't think it's anything like what the country used to bail the banks out with 10 years ago, 12 years ago. Put it into context, if it costs 100 billion, the banking industry cost us 500 billion. Can the government in all conscience not borrow again, not borrow more if come the autumn there was a second wave? But we're getting into speculation and politics, and the likes of Sean and I will just have to continue to try and deal with the reality with what we've got. But certainly the government's intention will be to end furlough in its current form, or in the furlough, the FSS furloughing scheme. I think that will end, but maybe there'll be other resources available. Inevitably, there will be enterprise grants and different things available.
I think what will happen after the end of October is I think they'll probably start to look at it very much on an industry-specific basis. So if the hospitality industry is still in a mess because of social distancing or whatever, they may decide to put a specific scheme in place for them to try and help them through that process. But I think the general scheme will just end. I don't think there's any doubt about it. As you say, unless there's a second wave, I think that will go. And then it'll be just looking at specific industries that are still really struggling.
I think that's right.
I think that's probably the right way to go, to be honest.
So just to wrap up then, Alistair, final piece of information and advice for people out there.
I mean, on the topic of the flexible furlough scheme, I think at the moment, go and look at the worked examples that are available on the HMRC, on the government guidance sites. Speak to the likes of Sean. By all means, please, if there are any queries, give us a ring. But I think you need to look at your own working examples and follow the government guidance for yourself in the first instance, because those that are doing your payroll, and mercifully I don't do payroll, they're the ones that are going to have to input the data onto the portal. You need to work through it. But as for your resourcing, I would say continue to encourage or force employees to take holiday whilst they're furloughed, in the hope that you get back stronger and then not have to worry about resourcing issues going forward. So use up those holidays as best you can reasonably do. Let's see how we climb out of this over the coming 3 months.
And Sean, from a financial purpose, FFS?
The key point now is as I say, for a lot of businesses now, they need to start really thinking about how they're going to get back to some air of normality, whatever that is, the new normal, whatever people keep calling it. But they have now really got to start to look long and hard at what their future workplace requirements are in terms of people. And if they are of the view that post the furlough scheme they're going to be overstaffed, then obviously they need to look at that and start the processes that they need to undertake, unfortunately. But because of the consultation periods, they need to be doing that fairly soon, I would have thought. Otherwise, they're going to run out of time. They need the likes of Alistair to give them advice to make sure they do it properly.
And as always, of course, take professional advice. If you do make an error, as you both say, HMRC are going to come at people, especially the major errors.
But yeah, just finally, an old client of mine, he's long retired, but he said to me quite a few years ago now, you could always weed the garden by 10%. There was a lot of common sense in that. It is an opportunity for employers when they've had full employment. It's been difficult to take decisions and call it a redundancy. Those opportunities at least are back. Use it as an opportunity to sweep the crap out of your business.
On that note, thank you both for joining us today. Whenever you listen to this, please subscribe, comment, like. We do like feedback. Obviously, your questions do dictate where we go to with these podcasts, so please do tell us what you need to know as well. These two people have many years' experience in their industries. They are experts, and they are telling you advice that will keep you within the remits and also save you costs in the long run. It might cost at the start, but they save you a lot of money in the long run. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us today. It's been great, that has. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Alistair.
Catch up soon.